Welcome to My Business Matters, the Michigan Chamber podcast.
Hi there, I am Sara Wurfel, the Michigan Chamber's Chief Communications and Marketing Officer. Great to be back again today. We are going to be talking about an issue that's pretty much top of mind for every business in this state. Doesn't matter what industry, where they're located, or what size they are. And that's pretty much workforce development and talent retention and recruitment. So we are going to be talking about that, and we have three amazing resources and leaders with us today. First is Joe Bamberger, the founder and managing partner of Emerge, a consulting firm focused on helping employers build talent pipelines. Ryan Hundt, CEO of the Michigan Works Agency, an organization that's dedicated to providing support and services to both employers and job seekers. And then Julie Mann, the Chief Human Resources Officer for Neogen, an advanced global sciences company providing a wide array of products and services to ensure animal and food safety. That's science right here in our backyard. That's pretty cool. So we've got a lot of ground to cover, so let's get started. One of the first things that I wanted to talk about right now is that one thing of it matters to everybody, basically, right? This whole issue of talent development, recruitment, retention, workforce shortages, you're hearing it everywhere. What do you guys see from each of your perspectives about, and everybody talks about there is no silver bullet solution. What would be the way that you approach it from each of your perspectives and the roles that you do? And I guess, Joe, we'll start with you because you're a consultant working with both schools, right, on that first side, and then businesses as well, too.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, right, what Emerge does is focuses on that emerging talent hiring. So helping businesses create pipelines of entry-level talent specifically. So really when you think of succession planning within a business, are you working to replace just your executive levels and ownership, or are you looking to build a pipeline and bench behind each role? And the most successful companies operate, I like to use the analogy of like a college football team, right? They're going to hit that transfer portal every once in a while to find a great quarterback or running back, but the teams that build the most sustained success do so because they have the best recruiting classes coming in year after year. And so the companies that can buy into that model and see past the problems and openings that they had yesterday and today and think 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years out into the future and build that pipeline and that bench from the bottom up tend to have the most success.
Right. What about you, Ryan, and the role that you guys have as kind of this agency for agencies that are working on this on the ground in pretty much every county across the state?
Sure. Great question, Sarah. And thanks again for having us today on the podcast. We appreciate it. The Michigan Works Association represents the 16 Michigan Works agencies throughout the state that are locally there in our communities all across the state. In all 83 counties, they cover workforce services for both employers and job seekers. On average, the Michigan Works agencies themselves support about 675,000 job seekers per year and a little over 32,000 employers per year in a range of different programs. The system as a whole, we like to describe as a demand-driven system, meaning that we need to be the front door for accessibility for both employers and job seekers. But on the demand-driven side, we need to be able to understand what are the in-demand occupations, what are the in-demand skill sets that employers are requiring both in the short term to help fill their immediate labor needs, but then looking out long-term, maybe in the next 5 to 10 to 15 years, which direction do we need to go as a state in order to better support the workforce system from a policy and a program perspective, which is why we're proud to continue supporting key programs like the Going Pro Talent Fund, while also looking for other areas that we could provide services to help both job seekers in transitioning careers, maybe starting a new career, or employers in kind of serving as that extension of their human resources function to deliver those resources at the local level within each of the Michigan Works agencies throughout the state.
Okay, you said something I want to come back to, but right now I'm going to jump over to Julie, kind of in your role and what you see kind of in this broader talent development space. What would you say right now is kind of the biggest challenge out there?
You know, I think the biggest challenge is still finding, connecting the dots to finding the employees, right? I mean, the workforce, we're at the lowest unemployment rate we've been at in like 50 years, last stat I read. And, as an employer, you're feeling that because, we're fortunate at Neogen Corporation, we're always growing. And so when you're an always growing type of company, you're always hiring. And so finding that resource, finding out what rock they're hiding under, right? Then you've got a couple rocks here, right? So we're always looking at what rock are the people hiding under, and then how do we attract them to Neogen?
Got it. Two things. I have so many questions. It's like where to start with this, right? I want to start one with, I think, a statistic that's actually hard for me to wrap my head around at the stage where I'm at right now, but it's this 81% of all jobs in the state of Michigan by 2028, which is less than 5 years from now, are not going to require like a 4-year bachelor's degree. So do you guys agree with that? I mean, from what everybody's saying, these futurists out there, and what does that mean from each of your perspectives and what we need to be looking at and doing?
Yeah, from my perspective, I think that stat is accurate. And that's not to say that there's going to be no post-secondary education, right? That's not saying, hey, once you finish high school, you're qualified to work in any career path, right? That's not what the stat is saying. It's saying you don't necessarily need a 4-year bachelor's degree. And I think where we see the economy going is to more of a skills-based hiring economy. It's less about do you have the degree and more about can you do the job. And so programs that are supportive of stackable credentials and micro-credentials and those types of certificate-based programs are going to be the future in preparing candidates for the workforce.
I've been working in economic and workforce development for, it'll be a decade this year. And I remember in a previous role when I was at the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, we were working with some specific tech companies in Ann Arbor who back in 2017, 2018, they were thinking already about that skills-based hiring model. And they were not necessarily looking at the 4-year degrees, but they were looking at how can we get somebody in the door who has a strong work ethic, who we know has the capacity to build some of those stackable credentials, and that would make them a well-rounded employee. So those conversations have been taking place at least for the last 5 years with some of the more innovative companies. But what I think as we're seeing right now in the economy is other companies are going to have to take note of those trends. And again, like Joe said, just because 81% of the jobs by 2028 won't require a bachelor's degree, it will require some type of post-secondary credential, post-secondary training beyond high school, even if it's more specialized in focus, especially in certain industries like tech and advanced manufacturing. That just makes the work that we do in the workforce space that much more important and collaborative in partnership with private sector companies, in partnership with educators, STEM programs, other training partners, because we know that the future economy is likely going to be built on that skills-based hiring.
I think too that, and you could probably emphasize how your company feels, but companies think there's a right way to do things, there's a wrong way to do things, and then there's our way to do things. And I think most companies would rather train their own workforce in their way rather than have them be receive 4 years of education that trains them in a generic way.
Yeah, and I would there's a couple different responses. Like when I think about that from a question standpoint of view, I think that the answer, the trend is going that way. Who knows what the number is, right? Like we'd all be in Tahiti on a beach, rich and wonderful. But it's a supply and demand issue, right? We don't have enough talent out there that we can afford the talent to be not in the workforce for that 4-year period. And I think, when I hear that question or that stat, I think about it more, from a supply and demand standpoint of view, we have to think differently. So therefore, it's a Build-A-Bear workshop, right? How are we gonna do that differently so that we can attract them into the workforce and then develop them to where they need to be? And there's always going to be professions and positions. We have high science jobs. They're going to have degrees. And so there's going to be those specialized roles that have degrees. But I think some of those generalized, you're going to see look different, look stackable, look skill-based, because the employers need them to be working.
Right.
And that's a nice benefit when you can align with an employer, maybe even through tuition reimbursement, through different types of credential building programs, so that we don't have the level of student debt and the expense out there as well. I think all of those things I think are all going to merge together, which probably are all elements behind that stat.
Going back to that, I think some of you each touched on it in a different way. Like you can kind of see that as kind of in the automotive industry, right? The state that put the world on wheels in this transition into electric and the whole mobility conversation. How do you see, and I guess Julie, with your company, like So Advanced Sciences, like what do you see are the biggest skill sets that you need employees to have right now to think about to transition to those different kinds of industries?
Well, I'm going to guess that Joe's seeing a lot of this and that. we need to train people just how to show up at work. Right? I mean, we've got a 4-year degree, right? That's way over here. Yeah. But we need people to understand they have to show up. They have to be on time. They can't just take every Friday off because it's Friday and they don't feel like working on Fridays. And so it's some of those fundamental accountability skills at all levels that I think we need to really be sure that we're developing, as we're bringing kids through K-12, as we're bringing our early career people into careers. And those are some of the skill sets that, you don't want to learn the hard way, because that usually means you don't have a job.
Yeah, I think some of the clients that we work with, if we ask what sort of skill sets are most important, it's soft skills more than anything else, right? It's the accountability aspect, Julie, that you were talking about, but it's just communication. It's presentability. It's professionalism. It's, do you have the basic etiquette to operate within whatever your environment is. Right. Those soft skills are often really hard for employers to teach. And so students developing those either through their high school programs, their college programs, or other post-secondary programs, or even just their involvement in sports teams or their community initiatives, right? Those are the skills that employers value the most. If you look at the average job description or how companies evaluate that entry-level talent, it's primarily on, do they have a good work ethic? Do they have that willingness and ability to learn? How well do they fit my company's mission or core values, right? Everything technical, for the most part, is teachable, right? You can't teach people to be who they are, right? And so companies are evaluating and putting a lot more emphasis on those soft skills and core values.
And I think another challenge that's going to come in with that is with our remote world, right? If you think about when I entered the workforce, I was surrounded by professionals that I could watch and emulate to try to figure out how I do this, And so you got to watch a lot of social interactions and kind of learn the way of the road. And I do think as we, that remote workforce, it's a little bit harder to gain those skills because you just aren't around as much. And those are the skills that are really important. So I think that's going to continue to be a challenge.
Right. I can see that whole, kind of that post-COVID effect where it's still, right, there's that new expectation of how much of what I do I have to be, right, someplace, or being able to do it remotely. And then I think one about generations, the different generations. I want to see if anybody has any, what are you looking at in that standpoint of how somebody that is like a total digital native and has only grown up with that and just has a different expectation rather than somebody that wants to be there to collaborate. And that varies across industry, obviously, but I'm just interested in kind of what you're seeing on that front and if there's anything in particular that employers should be looking at.
I was on a Future of Work interview yesterday with Detroit's public TV station, and it was on Gen Xers in the workforce. And so we talked quite a bit about the role that Gen Xers are playing now that they do have, globally speaking, the largest portion of leadership roles in organizations. And we look at the baby boomers who are retiring or already have retired, and Gen X, even though they make up a smaller portion of the workforce compared to millennials right now. How are some of those dynamics that they lived through? If we think about it, really for Gen Xers in particular, when they started their careers in the mid to late 80s, let's say in the financial sector, for example, a lot of the processing that took place, a lot of the loan applications, for example, were done on paper. And if you fast forward to 2023, almost every single financial transaction that we do as an average American is done on our phone or on our computer. And they've had a front seat to that evolution in technology all the way along. And so their adaptability, I do think you see that impacting and influencing in a very positive manner future workers in the millennial generation and in Gen Z. We typically think of the millennials as the ones that are sort of that digital natives, but I think you could make the argument that Gen Xers, with them seeing that full evolution, they're really the digital natives that have passed along that knowledge and those skill sets and that adaptability to other generations. But I do think it's important also for companies to be mindful that right now they very well could have someone that's a baby boomer all the way on down to a Gen Z in their workforce, and how do they ensure fairness, not just in compensation and promotions, but how do they ensure that their policies are one that is conducive to a work environment where we're having intergenerational talent really contributing to a company's organizational mission and their bottom line.
Got it. We're getting close out of time already, which is a little crazy. So I guess we're going to We're coming back for part 2. Thank you, everyone. We are pretty much going to be out of time for this episode this week, but make sure you stay tuned next week where we're going to be back with Joe and Ryan and Julie, and we're going to be actually switching gears a little bit. We're going to be talking about some of the resources and opportunities and programs that are out there that can actually help employers. So thank you and stay tuned.